So which platform is better for reselling, Vinted or Depop? Hi guys, welcome back to All I Know About Depop. Today we are cheating on Depop to talk about Vinted. Vinted has really changed the game for reselling here in the UK over the past few years. In 2024 it introduced Vinted Pro, which means you can legitimately sell on there now as a reseller and you do not have to be sneaky. In this video I'm going to talk about the pros and cons on selling on Vinted compared to selling on Depop. And I hope this can be a helpful video if you're new to reselling and you don't know which app to use. I am going to be sharing my opinion on all of these pointers. So let's get into it. Should we jump ship to Vinted? First off, I wanted to talk about the different demographics of users on Vinted versus users on Depop. Depop has always had a young demographic. Depop's aesthetic and marketing has always been targeted exclusively to millennials and Gen Z. And the majority of sellers on Depop aim their shops at this under 30 crowd. In fact, I would argue if your shop does not target that younger demographic, then you are not going to have a successful Depop shop because that older audience is just not on the app. Now, Vinted is different. While it's still super popular with younger buyers, it's actually attracted a much broader audience. There is more shoppers on the Vinted app than just this younger demographic, which is on Depop. So as a seller, you've got access to a much wider demographic on Vinted, which means you can list items for all age ranges. This also means that for Vinted, there's a lot more people using that app, which means there are more potential buyers on Vinted than on Depop. If you're new to reselling and you know you definitely want to target that younger demographic, then Depop should work really well for you. However, if you want to target an older demographic or you want to be able to sell a wide range of items to a more varied audience, then I think Vinted is the better choice. Algorithms. One of my favourite things about Vinted is how smart its algorithm is. If you're shopping on Vinted, Vinted does a really great job in figuring out what you want to buy by what you're clicking on, and then it makes really great listing recommendations for you. And these recommendations tend to be spot on. They'll be listings of the brand, of the style, of the price point that you want to pay. And I think the intelligence of this algorithm, which figures out what I want to buy and then puts those items in front of me, is the reason why Vinted has become such a big competitor to these huge reselling apps like eBay and Depop, because Depop and eBay's algorithms are just nowhere near as good. Now this is great if you're shopping on Vinted because it means you find what you're looking for, but it's also great if you're selling on Vinted because it means that your listings are being put in front of the people that are really potential buyers. So for me, Vinted completely wins in this category. It's pretty common on Vinted to sell things fast. I've sold items before within like 5 minutes of listing them. In fact, from my experience of selling on Vinted, I find that most items that sell within the first 2 days of me listing them. And that is because Vinted's matchmaking between seller and buyer is really good. I do think because of this algorithm, you do have to price items a bit more strategically on Vinted. I tend to price items a little bit lower than I would price them on Depop because the matchmaking algorithm doesn't just put your items into the buyer's recommendations, but puts all your competitors' similar listings also in the buyer's recommendations. So the buyer is going to want to check out the one that has the best price. In comparison, things sell a little bit slower on Depop. A fast sale for me on Depop is something that sells within a week. I find with Depop that the focus is on creating the shop and growing a following, and that's how you make your sales. So if you're focused on getting the best possible price for the item, then Depop is probably going to be your best bet. Whereas if you're looking to sell items quickly at competitive prices, then Vinted is going to suit you better. I would say if you're interested in growing a brand, Depop is much more shop focused. Vinted, on the other hand, is more about the individual listings rather than creating a shop. User experience and ease of listing. This is another reason why I think Vinted has caused disruption to the reseller app industry. Listing on Vinted is so quick and easy. You just upload your photos, fill in the essentials like size, condition, price, and that is it. It easily takes less than 2 minutes to list something to Vinted, which is very quick. Now Depop is more time consuming. There are more fields to fill out. They have introduced a AI feature that fills in the first line of the description for you, which I think works really well, but in comparison to Vinted, it is still a bit slower. Also, because of Vinted's really great algorithm, filling in the fields and writing a descriptive listing with keywords is just not as critical in getting your listings seen as it is on Depop. On Depop, using keywords in the description and filling in all the fields is how your listing is going to show up in search and get your listing discovered by potential buyers. As a beginner, if you're looking for a platform that is easy to use and doesn't require a lot of time, then Vinted is going to be the better choice. When it comes to shipping, both platforms, Vinted and Depop, have made it easy to ship your items. But I do think with Vinted, it is a little bit more simpler. With Vinted, they give you 3 easy shipping options: small, medium, large. You just pick the right one based on the description that they give, and you can either choose to receive a QR code or a label to print at home. And you just simply drop this off at your local drop-off place. They do Yodel, InPost, Royal Mail, Every, and you don't have to have all of these on. You can actually switch whatever ones you want off in your Vinted settings. I only have Yodel and Every switched on because these are the easiest for me to ship. The Vinted buyer pays for the shipping separately, so you do not have to add a postage cost to the price of your item. Vinted just takes the extra shipping money from the buyer and buys the shipping label for you, so you don't need to calculate the cost of shipping at all when you list. Depop, on the other hand, has more flexibility, but also potentially more confusion. You can either handle your own shipping or use Depop's shipping option, which works similar to Vinted's. If you're new to reselling, then Vinted's shipping process is much more easy to get your head around, and you don't have to worry about what shipping cost to charge and what courier to use. However, one downside of Vinted is that you can only sell to people within the UK. So if you wanted to reach an international market, then Depop is going to suit you better. Now, customer support. This is where Vinted really falls short, in my opinion. If you've ever tried to reach Vinted support, you will know how frustrating it is. Their responses are often, if not always, automated, and it takes a lot of effort and time to actually reach a real person. I recently had a problem with verifying my Vinted Pro account. Even though I submitted all the necessary documents, I kept failing the verification process, and the lack of help from Vinted really did make the situation a lot worse. I was relying on Reddit posts of other sellers in the same situation to try and figure out what was going wrong, and whenever I tried to get in touch with Vinted, I was just getting stuck in really unhelpful conversations with like automated robots. On the other hand, Depop's customer support has been a lot more responsive. Whenever I've had an issue, I've been able to get in touch with a real person that has helped me to resolve it. As a reseller, you really want to know that if something goes wrong, you can resolve it quickly, especially if you are relying on a source of income from the app. So for this one, Depop is my winner. So which platform is better for reselling, Vinted or Depop? If you want a broader audience, quicker sales, and an easy to use platform, then I would go for Vinted. The algorithm, the ease of listing, the simplified shipping process really makes Vinted a great option, especially for new resellers. But if you're focused on a younger demographic and you want to build a brand, Depop might be more for you. Plus, Depop's customer service is a lot more reliable. For me personally, at the minute, I lean towards Vinted. I do like how quick you can list and how fast you can make sales. But it's important to know the strengths and weaknesses of both apps. And if you're not already selling on both, I would recommend to give them both a try. Let me know in the comments which app you prefer, and if this video has helped, be sure to check out these. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.